Good morning or afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's presentation on non-consequentialist moral theories and social ethics. Over the course of this session, we'll explore the concepts of duty, rules, and moral principles that guide our decisions beyond just the outcomes they produce. I'm excited to dive into these important ideas with you and discuss how they shape our understanding of ethics in society. Let's get started. Here we have two key perspectives for evaluating moral actions. On the right, we see the consequence-focused approach, which judges actions based on their outcomes. Essentially, it asks, do the results justify the means? If the consequences are positive, the action is considered morally good. On the left, we have the non-consequentialist viewpoint, represented by the balanced scale icon. This perspective evaluates actions based on inherent principles or duties, regardless of the results. So even if the outcome is beneficial, if the action itself violates a moral principle, it would be deemed wrong. The image of shoes standing at a crossroads between sloth and vitality symbolizes the choices we face, whether to act based on results or adhere strictly to moral rules. Understanding these two approaches helps us navigate complex ethical decisions. Here, we're exploring what deontological ethics is all about. First, we have duty, which highlights the idea that there are certain obligations we must follow, no matter what the consequences are. It's about doing what's right simply because it's our responsibility. Then, we move to rule, where the focus is on sticking to moral laws and principles that serve as our guiding standards. These rules help ensure consistency and fairness in our actions. Lastly, intention plays a key role by considering the moral importance of the motives behind our actions. It's not just about what we do, but why we do it. Together, these elements form the core of deontological ethics, a framework centered on duty, rules, and the intentions driving our choices. Here, we're looking at two central principles of Immanuel Kant's ethical philosophy, known as the categorical imperative. First, we have universalizability, which asks us to consider whether the rule behind our action could be applied universally. In other words, would it be acceptable if everyone acted according to this same principle? If the answer is no, then the action is not morally permissible. This helps us evaluate the consistency and fairness of our decisions. The second key principle is humanity as end, which emphasizes the inherent value of each person. It reminds us that we must treat individuals as ends in themselves, not merely as means to achieve our own goals. This principle underlines respect and dignity, insisting that people are valuable on their own, not just for their utility. Both of these ideas work together within Kant's moral framework to guide us towards ethical actions that respect universal fairness and human dignity. Here we have an overview of W.D. Ross's concept of prima facie duties. Ross suggested that our moral obligations are not absolute, but conditional, meaning several duties can come into play at once and sometimes conflict. This requires us to use careful judgment in deciding which duty takes precedence in a given situation. On the right, we see some common examples of these duties. Fidelity means keeping our promises. Reparation involves making amends for past wrongs. Gratitude is about recognizing the benefits we receive from others. Justice calls for fairness in our actions. Beneficence encourages us to promote good and help others. Self-improvement focuses on developing ourselves, while non-maleficence reminds us to avoid causing harm. The portrait of Ross here connects us to the thinker who developed this important ethical framework, and the icons help visually anchor these key ideas of balance and order in moral decision-making. Together, these concepts highlight the complexity and nuance involved in making ethical choices. Here we see a comparison between perfect and imperfect duties in terms of rigidity. The horizontal bar chart clearly shows that perfect duties have a much higher rigidity level, rated at 90, whereas imperfect duties have a lower rigidity level, around 40. This means that perfect duties are more strict and more obligatory, leaving less room for flexibility, while imperfect duties are somewhat less binding and allow for more discretion in how they are fulfilled. Understanding this distinction is crucial because it helps us see why some moral obligations are more enforceable or necessary than others. Here we see the core principles of deontological ethics, laid out clearly. First, duty. This principle emphasizes that our actions must be guided by a sense of obligation and responsibility, no matter the consequences. Next is intention, which highlights that morality is determined by the intent behind actions rather than just the outcomes. Then we have universality, meaning moral rules apply consistently and universally to everyone in similar situations. Respect for persons reminds us that every individual should be treated as an end in themselves, never merely as a means to an end. Finally, rule-based reasoning focuses on making ethical decisions by adhering to established moral rules and principles. Together, these principles form the backbone of deontological ethics, stressing the importance of moral duty and fairness. On this slide, we explore the important ethical distinction between using people as means versus treating them as ends. First, we see an example of a company exploiting its employees by focusing solely on profits, ignoring their rights and well-being. This represents using people as mere means to an end, which is ethically problematic. In contrast, treating people as ends involves respecting their autonomy and welfare, as shown by organizations that implement fair work policies to support and empower employees. At the core of this is the moral principle that people should always be regarded as ends in themselves, never simply tools for achieving other goals. This principle emphasizes the intrinsic value and dignity of every individual, reminding us to prioritize respect and ethical treatment in all our interactions. Here we're comparing two major approaches to ethics: deontology and consequentialism. Starting with deontology, this view holds that moral judgments are based on following duties and rules. These rules are absolute, meaning they must be followed no matter what the outcomes are. The focus here is on respecting people as ends in themselves, not merely as means to an end. When facing moral dilemmas, the emphasis is on prioritizing duties and adhering to principles above all else. On the other hand, consequentialism judges morality based on the outcomes or consequences of actions. Rules serve more as flexible guidelines that can change depending on how effective they are. The main goal is to maximize overall good or utility. So when confronting moral dilemmas, the key is to evaluate which course of action produces the best overall results. In summary, deontology stresses absolute rules and respecting persons, while consequentialism centers on the consequences and achieving the greatest good. Each offers a distinct way of thinking about what makes actions morally right or wrong. Here we explore key applications of social ethics and how they guide professional and societal behavior. First, human rights form a crucial foundation by ensuring we protect inherent human dignity and respect individual freedoms, symbolized here by the balanced scales. Then, public policy and justice emphasize fairness and consistency, making sure our decisions align with moral duties, which this gavel icon represents well. Limits on means remind us that the methods we use to achieve our goals must always be morally acceptable, regardless of the outcome, captured by the shield symbol. Lastly, professional ethics provide clear codes of conduct to help professionals maintain high ethical standards in their practice, fittingly represented by the stethoscope icon. Together, these elements create a structured approach to applying ethics in social contexts, ensuring our actions are both principled and just. Here we focus on three fundamental rights that play a crucial role in protecting human rights. First, the right to life, which highlights the importance of safeguarding every individual's life because of their inherent dignity. This right emphasizes our duty to preserve life under all circumstances. Next, we have freedom from torture. This principle prohibits torture based on the moral necessity to respect human dignity, regardless of any outcomes or situations. Finally, the right to fair trial ensures justice by guaranteeing a fair process for everyone, independent of the result. Together, these rights form a vital foundation for human rights protection, symbolized here by the person examining a globe, reflecting the global importance of these principles. Here we're looking at deontological ethics as it applies to professional practice, which focuses on duty and adherence to moral rules. In medicine, Confidentiality is paramount. Healthcare professionals have a duty to protect patient privacy, which helps build trust and maintain high ethical standards. On the other hand, in the field of law, client advocacy is critical. Legal practitioners must prioritize their clients' interests, but they also need to balance this with justice and ethical guidelines. Both professions highlight how deontological ethics requires professionals to follow specific ethical duties, ensuring integrity and respect within their roles. The image here underscores the complexity and structured nature of these ethical frameworks in practice. Deontology faces several recurring criticisms that are important to consider. First, there's the issue of rigidity. Deontological ethics is often seen as inflexible because it applies moral rules without taking into account different circumstances. This strictness can sometimes lead to outcomes that feel unfair or impractical. Next, we have duty conflicts. These occur when two or more moral duties demand incompatible actions, putting a person in a difficult position where it's unclear which duty should take precedence. Another common critique focuses on an overemphasis on intentions. Critics argue that by concentrating so much on the intention behind an action, deontology overlooks the real-world consequences, which can sometimes be more significant. Finally, there's the problem of rule specification. It can be quite challenging to create universal rules that apply consistently across all contexts, as situations vary widely and moral dilemmas can be complex. These criticisms highlight the complexities and debates surrounding deontological ethics. When dealing with conflicting duties, one important concept is prima facie balancing, introduced by Ross. Here, duties are seen as initially binding, but when they come into conflict, we weigh them against each other to decide which should take priority. Next, we have duty hierarchies, which involve ranking duties to clearly determine which one should prevail in case of a clash. Then, specification or contextualization plays a crucial role by tailoring how duties are applied depending on the situation, making their scope and relevance clearer. Finally, case-based moral judgment involves looking at specific cases to resolve conflicts between duties through practical and thoughtful consideration. Together, these methods help us navigate complex moral decisions effectively. Here we explore the contemporary relevance of deontological ethics across several important fields. Starting with data privacy, deontological ethics highlights our duty to protect personal information and to respect user consent, which is crucial in today's digital world. Moving to biomedical ethics, this framework focuses on respecting patient autonomy and the moral duties healthcare professionals have to ensure ethical medical practices. When it comes to AI ethics, there's a strong emphasis on the responsibilities of AI developers to prevent harm, promote fairness, and uphold ethical standards in technology. Finally, human rights law centers on the fundamental duty to uphold inherent rights and justice for all individuals, reinforcing the broader societal obligations we share. Together, these points illustrate how deontological ethics provides a critical foundation for various disciplines, guiding us to act according to moral principles and duties. To wrap up, let's revisit the core ideas of deontological ethics. At its heart, this approach emphasizes duties and moral principles that ensure we treat individuals as ends in themselves, not merely as means. These foundational concepts guide ethical reasoning across many different situations. Next, we see its practical applications. Deontological ethics provides essential tools that support both professional and public ethics, helping to shape policies and practices while respecting each person's inherent dignity. Finally, we acknowledge the limitations and challenges this framework faces. As society becomes more complex, these challenges have driven important refinements in deontological theories to keep them relevant and responsive to contemporary social contexts. This ongoing evolution ensures the framework remains a vital guide in ethical decision-making.